Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Dancing with Change in FM. I'm very pleased to be hosting a conversation with Marshall MacFarlane. Marshall is actually a facility senior project manager with Bell Bank, and he's an IFMA Fellow. He's had nearly 3 decades of experience. He's worked in manufacturing, higher education, municipal government, and the tech sector. He's a well-experienced facility manager. He's also the immediate past president of the Greater Phoenix chapter. And Marshall is actually a millwright industrial mechanic by trade. So, quite a generalist, I'd say. He's also a Canadian Army veteran and has been a freelance writer and editor since the mid 1980s. So, welcome, Marshall, to this conversation. And I'm really looking forward to what you are seeing as change in facility management.
Hey, well, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here and talk about emergency management and business continuity and how it relates to facilities management.
Very timely topic, I'd say.
Yes, absolutely. As the world becomes more tumultuous and volatile and complex, I think that having a business continuity plan, or at least the start of a plan, is important. And one thing that I feel very strongly about is even if facilities managers don't feel it's their responsibility, emergency management, they will get drawn into the mitigation and the response portions of an incident, um, and they may be unwittingly responsible for it as well. So I think it really behooves facilities managers to understand business continuity and emergency response and all those things that may happen on their sites. And again, if whether or not they're formally charged with being involved in that, they will be, whether they like it or not.
I think that's an excellent conversation. And, I totally agree. And I think that if we can, through this discussion, talk about how facility managers need to get engaged and how they should get engaged, I'd actually suggest they should take the lead. So fill us in on that.
Yeah, I think it's important for facilities managers to take the lead, if not a formal kind of appointment or role, then at least a practical one, and taking the lead on this, because particularly if the incident involves buildings or the movement of people, the facilities manager is going to be involved. And if you look at most type of disasters, and whether it's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, and you kind of look at the chaos that those incidents bring, um, whether first responders are needing utility shutoffs or floor plans or need to evacuate people into staging areas, the facilities manager is going to be the best person or the best team to help supply all that information. And they're used to handling logistics. Facilities operations is all about logistics. So they're best positioned to operationalize all of the response plans, basically.
So, could you give us an overview, just from your experience, with all these different types of organizations, which I think is very useful because they all function slightly differently, but they do, in fact, function in buildings, and they have different levels of security, different levels of occupants and numbers, and so on. So, how would you advise is the best way to start putting together a plan?
Yeah, I think, and I do a session. I call it. I've changed the name, but I used to call it business continuity planning for dummies. But I think people didn't like that. I thought it was catchy. But uh, the first, you said it. The first part is to have a plan, and over 50 some percent of small businesses and medium-sized businesses don't have a plan at all. They've never even discussed it. And as they say, these disasters don't care. Whether the incident doesn't care whether you have a plan or not, and particularly with how fast and unvetted information travels today, your company will look bad when you respond to an incident and you don't have a plan. And whether that's fair or not, when the chaos kind of ensues and you're caught unprepared, your corporate, and whether you're even if you're a small business, your corporate kind of image is going to take a hit for not being responsive. And that's kind of the outfacing one. But you have a responsibility to your employees and their livelihoods and your business, and whether it's a family-owned business, you have shareholders, whatever, to keep that business running. So I think the first part is exactly what you said, is to have a plan. And again, the majority of businesses don't have a plan. And statistics tell us that in the event of an incident, over 40% of small and medium-sized businesses don't survive that incident. And
Yeah.
then the ones that do struggle to open, excuse me, they fail within the next 25% of those fail within the first year. So an incident of any kind can be very devastating to especially small and medium-sized businesses.
That's such a good point. And I think what's making it urgent now and in fact part of the change that we're seeing is varying climate events. So whether it's a flood that just happens, I mean, I'm in Canada, so this flooding took place this past year in Toronto. It took place in Montreal, and it literally flooded, you know, downtown city streets, buildings and everything. Or we're witnessing the fires in Los Angeles. So, you know, the need to be prepared, I think, is more and more compelling as the days go by. And that may include certainly a plan. Yes, you need a plan, but it might also include running through the what if scenarios and whether or not the building is prepared or the organization is prepared to actually handle that. So, could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And to your point, and IT isn't my wheelhouse, but I am preparing for this chat. I looked at statistics regarding incidents and disruptions, and the IT ones are scary, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. And 50% of businesses have encountered, malware attacks or ransomware attacks. Um, 9 in 10 companies permanently close if they're slow to reopen. 2015 survey found that 75% of businesses that don't have a disaster plan ultimately fail. So uh, the malware and the ransomware is should not be just left kind of floating in your IT department and with your kind of corporate rules that you need to follow. The way it is here, you need to think beyond that. And if your computer systems go down and you rely on certain systems, what's your plan for that? And we've had them here where, hey, the power goes out for an indefinite amount of time, or your network goes offline, and everyone kind of stands around and it's cute. No, we're going to go home and everything. But what if that lasts a day or 2 days or 3 days? Kind of what are you going to do? So um, I encourage, just like you said, if you have a regular meeting with your employees, particularly like if there's a monthly department meeting, walk through the what ifs. Okay, what if we flood? What if the power goes out? What if we have a pandemic? What if we and toss those scenarios out, and it's important to go beyond the first level. And I'll give you an example. When I talk to companies about business continuity, I'll say, okay, what if the power goes out? They say, well, we'll rent a generator. I'm like, well, what if it's out for 12 city blocks? Do you have an outstanding rental agreement or some kind of priority with all the generators? Because everybody's going to be trying to rent a generator, and you may be out of luck. Um, People kind of take the first pass and leave it there, but they don't drill down. And I think talking to your employees and kind of doing even if it's the five whys, do the five whats.
Yeah.
Um, because I'll say, hey, the building flooded or you had a fire, heaven forbid, and you don't want your employees coming to work. And they said, well, what are you going to do? They'll say, well, we have a FANO, we have a list that we call. And I said, okay, who's going to call? Well, Diane. I'm like, does Diane have the list? Well, where's the list? Um, is the list current? And so go beyond the first wash. I think that's the most important part because people kind of trigger it. They formulate an initial response, but they don't think beyond that. Um, so I think that's important. And then the other part of creating a plan that I stress, and it's a challenge, is determine your critical tasks. And sometimes that involves difficult conversations. Sally may live and breathe to have the company newsletter every quarter, but that's not a critical task that you have to accomplish if your business has suffered an incident, and that may be hurtful, to the employee or whatever. But this is the one opportunity, that I encourage employees or companies. Hey, if you can get by 3 days a week, 2 weeks, whatever you're kind of planned for, without doing that, then by absolutely don't do that. Um, because you want to focus on the critical things that you need to do. Whether there's certain parts that you need to produce or whether there's certain services that you just have to provide. And then internally as well, how are you going to pay your employees if the computers all, went up in the flood or whatever? How are you going to, how are you going to do benefits and that kind of stuff? So, and I think the easiest way to do that is if you're having regular conversations with your employees, like an employee meeting every month, just toss those things out and really talk to them. It takes 15 minutes and do a different scenario, every time, or a different, kind of sector of the incident and the response. Um, One thing that I tell people is, the fire department's going to come and put out the fire, then they're going to leave, and you're on your own. People don't kind of get that, that you're kind of standing there and everybody's gone and your building's half burned down, and do you move to an alternate site? Do you work at home? Do you do, they really don't think through these things, and I get it, but I think it's important.
Those are such good points, and you're right. I mean, the pace of change that's out there can, in fact, be the catalyst for any one of these scenarios. You know, you brought up something really important. I'm not certain that people think through how this could actually shut down their business. We typically think about the physical environment, yes. Now we're also adding the digital environment because so much of business is digital. But what do we do when that happens? And how long does it take to get back up and running? Scenarios are going to change. So having that kind of conversation about a backup plan, what do we do in this instance? That's brilliant. That really should be captured.
Yeah, and today we're faced with lead times and now political ramifications with tariffs and if you're in Arizona where I am and you have one or two units that cool your whole building and they go down with a catastrophic failure, or if they're in Canada where you are, where I used to live, and your primary heating source goes down in January, and it's going to take 3 weeks to repair or get the parts in, or
Right.
heaven for 26 weeks to replace it if it's a catastrophic failure. What are you going to do? I mean, basically, your business may go out of business because you lost your heat. I mean,
No,
you
that's so
know,
true. I should tell you a story, with various organizations that I've worked for over the years. One of them actually being the RCMP, and we literally would run through an annual what if scenario, and we would do that by location because every location is different. And it was really to test equipment, test backup equipment, and test procedures and so on to make sure that should that happen, then we would know what to do, where to find things, and how to respond, right? So that kind of advice, I think, is very critical.
yeah, absolutely. And then I encourage, particularly facilities organizations, every time something out of the ordinary happens, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a disaster, do a little lessons learned with your team and see what worked and what didn't work. And if you have something like an unintended evacuation of your building, I've worked in buildings where construction set off the fire alarm or things like that. Well, you still evacuated, so get your teams together and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to do differently? Where's there gaps? And when you're evaluating your emergency response, or whether it's mitigation or response or recovery, it's kind of the one rare instance where you want to find the holes and the gaps. You want to find where the system failed or didn't work the way it was supposed to, so you can correct those. We used to have, we'd have floods. In Arizona, there's no storm sewers, so when we do have heavy rains, it's not uncommon to have floods. And every time the team responded off hours to flooding, we'd go through and kind of say, well, what do we need next time? Or what would make this quicker? What would make it more effective? And we developed, we'll call them flood response kits that we put in totes and positioned around the campus. And they had a few sizes of rubber boots and little sump pumps and batteries and flashlights and things that helped us respond better. And that's not a disaster or an incident, but just that kind of continuous improvement in how you respond to things helps set that mindset and how you respond to something bigger.
One of the things I was just noting as you were talking there is the importance to connect with the larger community. If you are on a campus, for instance, how is the community around the campus, so the town, whatever, how do they actually respond? What services do they provide? And is it important? Uh, it's an obvious question, right? Because I think it is really important to connect with folks that run cities, communities, towns, whatever, to see what they're up to and how they respond, whether or not they're looking at providing, updates to their water sewer, for instance, or how they mitigate and deal with the instance of flooding or fires for that matter. So would that be something that you would also advise?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I was in a role at the University of Arizona where not only was I the campus facilities director, but being a satellite campus at the biomedical campus where I was, there was no I oversaw security as well, but there was no emergency management component. So I kind of de facto became the emergency manager as well, and was able to. They gave me the latitude to attend as much training as I wanted and could related to emergency management. Later, I got my degree in emergency management. But um, one of the things I was kind of, to your point, lost a little bit when I was early in being officially in that role. Um, I joined here. It's called the Arizona Emergency Services Association, but I imagine most states and provinces have, and certainly there's national associations of emergency managers, and that's a tremendous professional networking opportunity to do just what you said. I grew very strong relationships with the local police departments and the local fire departments and the local emergency managers and county emergency managers and state emergency managers. And not only were they an awesome source of information, but we shared lessons learned. I asked questions, they asked me questions about things. It's just a great opportunity where you're not kind of stuck out there by yourself. And I see a lot of companies, particularly smaller ones, where oddly they'll put the HR person or the facilities manager kind of in charge of resiliency or business continuity or whatever. And a lot of times they're over their head or they're lost. And I think tracking down these organizations of first responders and emergency managers is a great opportunity to network, even to the point where you can do joint training on your campus or that kind of thing. So um, yeah, it's absolutely critical, I think, to make sure, because you don't know as an emergency manager, officially or otherwise, you need to understand what resources are available to you and what's going to happen when that incident, strikes. So um, I think familiarizing yourself and having that relationship with other agencies or organizations is critical. And I developed relationships, um, for example, with NGOs and volunteer organizations I didn't even know existed. One was uh, kind of interesting. They had crisis response dogs, and they called them, they're like the Navy SEALs of therapy dogs, and these dogs were trained to respond to uh, shootings and plane crashes and all kind of hardcore disasters. Well, I had those in my Rolodex of response, options or something if something had happened on my campus. So I think networking, as much as we preach it in facilities management, I think it's absolutely critical if you have any emergency management responsibilities at all.
Boy, that is absolutely the case. I would support that everywhere, particularly now with, when we think about how fast fires move, for instance, or floods. And if we're not aware of, the larger community around it and what measures are in place and what people are there to be looking at those situations, we're kind of on an island, and we need to be creating these communities or getting involved with existing communities, sharing information, even sharing resources and training. So it's a great
Yeah,
idea.
I was exposed to so many interesting and useful training opportunities just by through that network. I've been on FEMA courses regarding um, pandemic response, weapons of mass destruction, threat and risk assessment. I was an active shooter trainer at my campus because I had the opportunity to go to active shooter response training with a couple of agencies. I've had multi-hazard response on university campuses through FEMA. It's just it opens up. There was trainings that were available to people outside of those agencies that really you had no way of knowing were available unless were kind of dialed in. So there's a saying in the emergency management community, they use it a lot, that at the disaster sites, not the time to be exchanging business cards. So um,
Exactly.
yeah, so you want to build those relationships early and really help each other and support each other, share those training opportunities, lessons learned. I had, and it works both ways. Uh, I made my campus available through the proper, authorities and permissioned, obviously, but SWAT trained on my campus. I had police bomb dogs trained on my campus. I had fire departments trained on our campus. So those training opportunities, it's not just a one-way relationship. It's a two-way relationship, and you can help serve your greater community by offering resources and sites and whatnot that you have available that they may not have known about.
Well, that's so wise. Like just creating those relationships is so important. One thing I was thinking about too, whether you've run into this situation where you have had to contend with some emergency, some disaster, whether it's weather related or not, has any of that learning then allowed you to apply it to whether it's a new building or renovation or maintenance, like say for instance a roof treatment, or maybe it's where different equipment in a building is located so it's more easily accessed. So does the learning from managing emergencies feed back into the design or redesign of a building?
Yeah, 1000%. And I can give you some hard examples right off the bat. We had obviously cooling is the big thing in Arizona, and I had a building whereby we had the main chiller um, went out and was going to be weeks to be fixed, and we had to rent a chiller to the tune of 30 grand a month or something to supply the chilled water for the cooling. But there was a significant additional expense to redoing the pipe fitting and the plumbing for a connection for a rental to be tied into the main system. Well, after that, I think I was involved in the construction of at least two more buildings, and that T and that connection was built when we built the building. Um, so if we ever had to bring in temporary cooling, the T and the valve and the flange was already there.
Right.
Um, yeah, so there's things like that. There's things like uh, mapping of utility shutoffs. we rethink how we have, floor plans available and what that looks like and how quickly available. And I think operating the building in an emergency is no different. As a matter of fact, it's probably more important than operating it in a non-emergency. And I did extra training for my facilities staff that was related specifically to emergency response. And I'll give you some examples. And these are things I don't think people understand the speed in which incidents unfold. And
Mhm.
we kind of, even when we discuss them, we do it in half time or real time, but everything moves so fast that's not, you can't possibly figure it out on the fly. And
Right.
that's where organizations fall down and they look bad because they had no plan. But um, you know, utility shutoffs, how we declare buildings safe and clear. If you do have a false alarm or how the call tree works, things as um, kind of out of left field as, hey, we need to have a press conference. Who are they going to ask to set up the area for the press conference and get extension cords and all facilities, right?
Yeah.
So having having a set of pre-designated areas for press conferences and having a kit put together, working with your AV team to have everything you need makes that a lot easier. Um, when and I live in a large city, but when 35 press vehicles descend on your property in 20 minutes, where are you going to park those, and who's going to get tasked with finding a place to park the press vehicles? Who's going to direct the press to where? All those kinds of things, and it doesn't matter. You can say, well, we just won't allow them on site. They'll find a way to be on site, and they'll be crawling all over the place and skirting security measures and everything else. So pre-thinking those things that, if the police or the fire needs floor plans, does everybody in your department have access to those? Is there a place? Is there a repository that's safe, or do you have it on a thumb drive? That you can provide those quickly. There's lots of organizations and there's some companies out that do a great job of digitalizing prints and everything. Now there's still companies who organizations have floor plans on paper rolls in a big in a big room. How are you going to provide if you have a, heaven forbid, you have a barricade or a hostage situation and the police um, need floor plans? You're going to go maw through 40 40 rolls of paper to get them floor plans. Even things we've walked through, and imaginations are great, and crazy ideas are helpful. If the police need to get somewhere in your building and there's barricades or obstruction, who knows better their ways around the innards of your buildings than the facilities team?
Oh,
If the police need an observation point or a sniper place, or who knows the high points and the accessibility of all your places better than your facilities team. So your facilities team is going to be drawn on for all this, whether it's an official draw or not. So I developed a special training for my team. Here's what you might want to expect. Here's what we should plan for. Here's where we fit into the overall site's response plan, and here's our role in mitigating some of these things. Facilities plays a big part in all of this.
oh, absolutely. In fact, I think facilities really do need to take the lead and direct the whole response for sure.
I agree wholeheartedly.
That was kind of interesting when you were talking about some of these scenarios. I mean, because I worked with the RCMP didn't even know their buildings because that's not where they spent most of their time. So it was absolutely up to the facility managers to take the lead in that and make sure that they had
Right.
resources and direction for situations, which you have to what if situations, as you suggested. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, and people generally don't know their buildings. As basic as it sounds, how you evacuate a building, where you assemble everybody. What if the assembly area is not available? Do you have an alternate assembly area? And facilities plays a big part in all of those. And if the fire alarm goes off today in your building and you evacuate everyone, and it was a false alarm, get out and talk to everybody. Hey, did you know where to go? How did it work? Were the exits clear? Did you, Really do those breakdowns when you have something happen to see what works and what didn't work.
I think that's so smart. Just, actually, whether it's for responding better to an emergency or just, everyday kind of work, taking time to just review what worked, what can we do better next time is just a great way to continuously improve, and it's great advice to a team for sure.
Well, and I even, you develop a certain mindset, and I even when I'm doing safety orientation or teaching evacuation that kind of stuff, I even encourage people, hey, if you're on vacation and you check into a hotel, walk up and down the halls, make a note of where the exits are, make sure think about how, hey, if this hallway is blocked, where am I going to go? And it. Same thing if you're in a theater or any of those things. It takes 5 minutes really to walk through that scenario, and maybe you're being paranoid or outrageous, whatever, it could save your life. And I always tell people, don't just look at the hall. Think about it in the framework of what if the hallway is full of smoke or it's obstructed or, there's panic and, how are you going to deal with all that?
It's a mindset for sure. It's certainly being aware, but then taking the time to actually think that way in your day to day. That's such a great idea.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I encourage people to know their surroundings and just think through what they're going to do if something happens.
Good advice for sure. So as we take a look around, things are changing constantly, and including, you know, just in the world generally. And I'm wondering whether it would make sense to just sit down and review the process, review the procedures as we encounter new threats, particularly, and I think what's topmost in my mind right now is something as catastrophic as the LA fires for sure. But it could also be a plane crash, and that's not out of the ordinary apparently either. So personally, where I live, we too are in a fire zone, and so what individuals do, what companies do, and what community does is get into what's called a whole fire smart approach to, how you design buildings, how you manage any vegetation around them, what steps you take to actually be fire smart on a daily basis. And so that's likely something that we might want to advise that facility managers get into their emergency plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just lends itself to what you said before about having that relationship with outside agencies. So if you say, okay, it makes sense to me as a facilities manager to be fire safe or have my property, fire safe. What's that mean, or where do I get those resources? If you have that relationship with your fire department, they'll fall all over themselves probably to come and give you a training or provide you some materials or whatever to create those mitigation efforts.
You know what? That's so true. Actually, as you were saying that, it just comes to my mind that here in Canada, the government has extended an invitation to retired former civil servants to um, engage in this whole business of emergency preparedness, mainly around fires, but just generally. I find that fascinating, that which is I mean, it's brilliant that they would tap into an existing resource that might have more time to actually spend on it and actually to educate as well. So it's interesting the number of initiatives that are being put in place with the mind to emergency management, and I think that's just a good thing to do these days.
Yeah, and I think there's a, and the in my experience, the problem's been is they weren't, I don't want to say they weren't well communicated. They probably weren't effectively communicated because there's so many. cool and interesting and helpful things that I stumbled across in my career. I'm like, how did I not know about this? And why doesn't everybody know about this? That, whether it's a resource or a training or a piece of equipment or a methodology or whatever, and it's you didn't know about it, and so it wasn't communicated effectively, and it's this gem that can help you immensely. And it's like now I'm just finding out about this, so I think it's it's important. Again, it comes back to the networking and having a relationship with those other agencies and NGOs. And here in the US there's a huge Walmart, which a lot of people don't like, but Walmart uh, are logistics experts, and they have same with Amazon, and these companies work with the government at a bunch of different levels in that capacity. Kind of the retail things aside, um, we utilize heavily here the Salvation Army, for example, and again, there's dozens and dozens of different entities that, beyond government entities that can help and provide resources. And I think the more of those know about, the better. And uh, you just got to get out there and understand the more tools you have in your toolkit, the better.
Oh man, that's so true. And I like the notion of really encouraging community, right? Because everything is so interconnected. Life is very complex, and the more we can find time and take the time to seek out others in the community and share and learn together, I think the stronger the response will be in any kind of an emergency for sure.
No, you're 100% right. And I was still thinking when you mentioned about the planes, what the campus I worked at was right under a flight path.
Right.
And it can be overwhelming when you begin your emergency response or your continuity planning. And there's a tool available. I'm sure people could find it through the power of Google. I found it years ago and I haven't seen it since, but it's an Excel spreadsheet that's basically a ranking matrix for disasters. So and it's an effective way if you're new to this. So you can sit with your stakeholders, which is an important part of the process. You need to include executives and IT and facilities and operations people, and depending on what your business is, because they're all going to have different needs, and kind of walk through what the critical tasks are that you have to keep going, um, and then how to respond to those and keep them going. But it's almost fun to sit down and brainstorm all the possible things that can go wrong. You can plan for a meteor hitting your building if you want to.
You might
Um,
have to.
but this matrix allows you to um, put a number of factors in, from the severity of the incident to the likelihood of the incident, which is where the meteor strike gets downgraded somewhat. Um, but and then kind of corporate. It includes corporate image. It includes loss of life, loss of equipment, and it basically allows you to prioritize all of the potential incidents that could strike your company or your site. So you can really focus on the most likely ones, and kind of go from there. So it's a little fun to think of all the things that might happen, but then address the ones that are most likely to happen.
Right. Oh, I really like the idea of a risk matrix. I personally, that's what we've used.
Mhm.
It's very telling, and you can combine it with a communication matrix as well, because then that identifies all of the players in the community that need to be part of this whole effort. So that's a great idea.
Communication. I'm glad you mentioned that. It invariably there's a bunch of chaos if you haven't planned it on who's allowed to release statements and by whose authorization and to whom and how that all works. And again, that all starts with planning. At the time of the incident isn't the time to be figuring out who's allowed to issue statements and by whose authority.
Oh, I think so. This has been a really great conversation. I'm going to ask you this question. Um, I certainly have, a sense of what the answer is, But would you suggest that with all of these components and all of these variables, that it's probably the role for a facility manager to take the lead in an organization?
100%. Particularly if there's a vacuum or there's nobody currently taking responsibility, I think it really behooves, and it's a natural extension of what we do, right? If the power goes out, we're responsible for the generator. If the generator's on site, if the front door uh, locks and won't open, we're responsible for fixing that. So continuity is just an extension of what we do every day. It's kind of in our mindset anyway. So um, particularly, yeah, particularly if there's nobody taking the horse by the reins kind of thing right now, I would, like any organization, pick your battles. If there's already a person or group appointed to be responsible for it, you may have to diplomatically insert yourself into that process somehow and guide it. Um, because if you make enemies, then it's all going to be for naught, right? So, and all your experience and knowledge is going to be wasted effectively. So, but yeah, absolutely, I think it's kind of the natural place for the facilities manager to take that role, and I think um, if the organization has a robust response team or person or plan, that certainly the facilities manager is a main consultant and resource and component of that planning.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's all about team building, certainly, and that's what we frequently encourage and promote for sure. So, well, thank you very much, Marshall. This has been an excellent, detailed conversation, and I think a very timely one because this kind of change is upon us, and it's something that we, as facility managers, need to be aware of, need to be involved in, and need to take the lead on. So, excellent conversation. Thank you very much.
No, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, and I geek out on emergency planning stuff and facility stuff. So I love talking about it, and it just I think if people ask why I like it, and I tell them it's a couple different things. It comes from my Boy Scout background. I was a Chief Scout in Canada, and being prepared and all that kind of stuff, and then some of my military training where you had to anticipate different threats from different places and plan for those. So it's just kind of a natural thing for me. And then just in being in facilities operations all these years of coming up with ways to mitigate issues, it's a natural place for me to be, I think.
It is. And thanks for encouraging other facility managers to get involved in this too. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.